Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for a year after Parkland, elevating silenced voices in the school safety conversation. My name is Jamie Coppell, and I'm the Deputy Director for Strategic Partnerships at the Communities for Just Schools Fund. I want to thank everyone who's collaborated with us in preparation for ensuring that today, a day on which we really must face our demons and acknowledge how much work we have to do as a nation, that today is a day that elevates the all too often silenced voices of youth and parents of color, of LGBTQ youth around this nation who deserve to not only feel and be safe and supported in schools, but to have their strengths recognized and elevated. I want to give a special shout out to the Center for Popular Democracy, Alliance for Educational Justice, Advancement Project, Power California, and the Dignity in Schools campaign, as well as all of our CJSF partners, some of whom I'll be introducing to you directly today. We're going to be moving this conversation to Twitter after the webinar today, so we encourage you to join us there to elevate the genius of the youth organizers and their allies who we will hear from today. I have a huge thanks to offer as well to our co-sponsors of today's event, the Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing and the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. With their support, we've been able to tap into networks that ensure we have the wonderful participation that we do indeed have today. And of course, thank you always to CJSF's donor members for the many kinds of support you offer every day. I have two logistical notes before we go any further. The first is that we encourage you to be in conversation and to share resources with each other in the chat box that you'll see. And also, if you have questions for the panelists specifically, or for us as the moderators, you can share those in the Q&A box that you will see at the bottom of your screen. Before we move on, we have a quick poll for you, so you can help us to understand the different hats that each of you are wearing in today's conversation. We're going to go ahead and cue that up. You can go ahead and respond on the screen there. We'll give you about 30 seconds, and then we'll end the poll. Okay, I see the votes are coming in. You're going to go ahead and just click. There we go. Excellent. We're very excited to see such a broad and diverse group of folks signed up to join us today, and I see that that has turned out, in fact, to be the case. Organizers are representing today. Excellent. They're neck and neck with advocates, and we have a good number of parents, youth, educators, and funders with us today. I think we can go ahead and end the poll. All right, and you can see the group that we have present. Organizers, take this first question for the win. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay. So to set the frame for why we are hosting this learning session today, the Communities for Just Schools Fund's work supports our partners' efforts on school safety. We always have. But this work really took off in a new kind of way in the aftermath of Parkland, due to the heightened threats posed by ever more harmful legislative proposals that sought to take advantage of this tragedy to secure money for arming teachers, to increase the presence of law enforcement in schools, and to invest resources in hardening schools. This past summer, our community partners' perspectives, communities' opinions generally, were largely unsolicited by the Federal School Safety Commission. After working with our partners to support them in traveling to hard-to-reach places with very limited notice to testify in front of the commission, we then worked with our partner network to produce this report that you see pictured here, which offers a fuller picture of what school safety must look like if we are to address the historical and systemic racism that clearly undergirded the limited focus and the narrow membership of the Federal School Safety Commission. We know that While emergency planning and infrastructure are important components of school design, calls to arm teachers to increase police presence in schools, and investments in physical security infrastructure, they too often come at the expense of more holistic considerations of student well-being. Investments proven to criminalize children threaten to derail the efforts towards the kinds of schools that all young people need and deserve. Today, you will hear clear talk about the need to divest from police in schools and to invest in the kinds of positive supports that will deliver on the beautiful potential of a public education system for all of our children. So our report, Do the Harder Work, Create Cultures of Connectedness in Schools, included 3 main sections. We hope that as a learning outcome from this conversation, you will be motivated to read that report. It includes an overview of the flawed process undertaken by the Federal Commission on School Safety. It includes excerpts of what we heard featuring the testimonies of our partners. And it also includes 10 recommendations, which you see pictured here. We created these tools, these recommendations, as a guide and a tool for state and local officials, and we hope that you are able to use it in your work as such. These are all of the 10 recommendations that are unpacked in the report and that highlight the work of our partner network working across this country. The 3 that you see highlighted are the 3 that we'll focus on today. So what are today's learning objectives? We want to develop a deeper understanding of why hardening schools is threatening the emotional and physical safety of students of color, of LGBTQ students and their peers. We want to offer you some concrete policy and practice recommendations that have been developed and are being advanced by organizers working on the front lines. And we want to have a conversation about how you can take action and use the resources that our experts that are here with us today are going to walk you through. So because you've chosen to take action already by joining us today, we want to make sure that you have some future opportunities to do even more of the same. I'm going to pause for a moment and show you a 2.5-minute video that was actually released today by the Grassroots Alliance for Justice Reinvestment, which is a coalition of 5 organizations, grassroots organizations working in different parts of the United States, several of whom are on the call with us today. And we hope that this will further underscore why we are together today to elevate silenced voices in the school safety conversation. And please note that we'll paste the resources that you see on this screen into the chat box so that you can bookmark them and save them for future use. I'm going to go ahead and queue up the video now.
I was at school on February 14th in the 3rd classroom that she was shot into, where 6 of my classmates were shot and 2 were killed.
The night of the shooting, I laid in my bed with the most overwhelming sense of helplessness that I've ever felt in my entire life. I live literally 50 feet away from the school. The noises of the helicopters and the police sirens, I had to go to sleep with that, or try to go to sleep at least with that.
Because we are youth, our voices are often silenced, and our experiences and knowledge is not taken into consideration.
Since the shooting at my school, a lot of the voices of the people that have been working for several years, their platform has been pushed down, and I think sharing my platform with them is very important.
Police don't make me feel comfortable or safe in my school, so why are we spending millions of dollars in funding police and like not putting it into resources that we actually want, like extracurricular classes, after school programs.
Safety and a healthy community really looks like providing resources for people, for young people, making sure that we have more guidance counselors, that we have restorative justice, that we have these restorative practices in our community, so that way we don't have to rely on like the criminalization.
Our community has been clear for a long time, and what we need is investment in mental health services inside of our schools.
Okay. Just pausing for a moment, because today is a solemn day, and I think that the voices of the young people of color who you heard in this video have offered us a clear call to action. And again, we are grateful to all of you for joining us today, because it is a clear signal that you are listening and that you are ready to take action. So we encourage you to keep that action going and take advantage of some of the opportunities included on this screen and the ones that you're about to hear about from our esteemed panelists. So CJSF's Partner Network includes more than 58 grassroots organizing groups working in 31 states to shift our nation towards just schools and the unfulfilled promise of equity in public education. So we are very lucky and delighted to welcome several of them as experts today. Monica Acosta from Padres y Jóvenes Unidos in Denver, Colorado. Audra Cologne from the Rockaway Youth Task Force and the Urban Youth Collaborative in New York City. Marlyn Tillman from Gwinnett Stop in Gwinnett County, Georgia, and the Dignity in Schools campaign. And Jonathan Stitt from the Alliance for Educational Justice. CJSF also has an amazing network of colleagues and comrades in this work, and we are so honored to have two of them with us today as well. Tyler Wittenberg from the Advancement Project's National Office, and Kate Terenzi from the Center for Popular Democracy. And so with that, and I've saved the best for last, I have the honor of handing it over to my friend and colleague, Thina Robinson-Mock.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Really happy to be with everyone today. Thank you, Jamie, and just thanks to everyone for joining us for this conversation. I'm Thina Robinson-Mock, Program Officer with Communities for Just Schools Fund, and we're really excited to be able to invite you to hear a conversation today about school safety that we know will not get the mainstream media attention it deserves, and that's a conversation led and informed by young people and parents of color. Our communities know all too well what it means when there are calls to harden schools. And this notion of hardening schools, we know, is rooted in fear, racial bias, distortions about what root causes of harm are. We're here to unpack that today with our incredible panelists. The content of this conversation will move in three parts. So first, we'll talk about why young people and parents are calling for an investment in mental and emotional health supports and professionals, not more police. Then we'll move to a conversation where we talk about why it's important to genuinely engage youth, educators, and communities. And then we'll talk about the need to keep and elevate the federal discipline guidance, and we'll unpack that link between school safety and school climate. First, we're going to have a discussion about the demand of investing in mental health and emotional health supports and professionals, not more police. But first, what I want to do is take a quick poll. We'll put that poll up on the screen for the audience to respond to. Do we have it up there on the screen? All right. It may take just a moment. And so this question, number 2, is how possible do you think it is to achieve police-free schools in your district in the next 3 years? And that's going to be the topic of our first conversation. So again, how possible do you think it is to achieve police-free schools in your district in the next 3 years? We'll give folks a second to respond.
Dina, I think the wrong question was up.
Oh, okay. If you don't see the question right away, just scroll down. I believe all of the poll questions are there in the same box. Does that work? Thumbs up. Okay, yes. So just scroll down and it's number 2. And then our fabulous pollers, let us know when we're ready to show the results, when we have sort of some critical mass. All right, are we ready for the results? All right. So we've got some interesting results there. And again, if you can't see them right away, just scroll down to number 2 and you'll get a little sampling of where we think we are on that. And this is, you know, I'm not surprised to see these results, actually, because we know that this issue of safety it's a concept that we really have to unpack and dive into. And the conversation that we're gonna hear from our first panelists will really unpack how many youth and parent organizations have come to make this demand of investing in more supports rather than police, and why the police presence in schools has led to very harmful results for young people. So I'm really honored to be able to introduce first Jonathan Stith with Alliance for Educational Justice, Tyler Wittenberg with Advancement Project, and Monica Acosta from Padres y Jóvenes Unidos. All 3 of our panelists are going to share their perspective on why it's important that we make these critical investments in young people, and unpack a little bit further why young people are calling for police-free schools. So I'm going to first turn it over to Jonathan Stith, who's going to share a little bit about the national campaign around police-free schools, and unpack some of the critical work that took shape last fall in the publication of the report We Came to Learn from Alliance for Educational Justice and Advancement Project. So Jonathan, turning it over to you.
All right, we go full screen. This looks like it's matching in the back. I'm looking good. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Jonathan Stith, National Director for the Alliance for Educational Justice. I was peeking in the participant room, so a lot of us are already family, already in struggle with it together. But for those who are new, the Alliance for Educational Justice is a national network of 30 youth-led and intergenerational groups working to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline. We got started almost over 10 years ago in 2008 at the start of the Obama administration, and eyeing the opportunity around the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. Who's controlling slides? Next slide. So for us, the work of the march towards police-free schools starts before Parkland. For us, it starts with the assault at Spring Valley, where the recording of Shakar being choked and slammed by a school resource officer and recorded by Nia Kinney went national. Young people in the Alliance were moved by Nia's act of bravery and could see and understand the school police brutality that Shakar experienced as an everyday experience. And they organized what became a national participatory defense campaign for Nia, where they mobilized and gathered hundreds of letters from young people all over the country in support of Shakar and Nia. The picture on this slide is them at the FCYO conference reading some of those love letters to Nia. also coming out of that, they pledged to build a national movement to challenge police presence in our schools, as well as to really figure out how we build rapid response capabilities to help our communities respond to these incidents of school police brutality and pivot from them to campaigns to win police-free schools. And so our next slide. And so our strategy, a 3-point program, has been one of helping to build groups build transformative campaigns around what we call the 7 Ds. Tyler will probably touch on those a little bit, as well as you'll get an example of it in the amazing work that's happening in Denver, Colorado from Monica with Padres. Our second tier was rapid response, and what that included was us documenting and monitoring incidents of school police brutality, as well as, again, helping communities respond. And so from 2016, we've responded to over 20 assault acts, helping communities to do that. And again, some of what you'll hear from Tyler can talk about is the work that we've done in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Student Union with the assault at Ben Franklin. And then we picked up a third plank from rethinking the National Youth Movement Assembly and this idea of youth sanctuary strategies, that there were things that young people could do for themselves, kind of based on the idea of self-determination, that could keep them safe in lieu of or until we win police-free schools. And that included some of the amazing work around community self-defense, deportation defense, cop watch, and other practices. Next slide. Oh, they took the order out. And so I guess in understanding kind of where we're at, so before Parkland, we were clear from federal data that our schools were over-policed and under-resourced. The data showed that once a school, the majority of police were placed in Black and brown schools. What we knew at the time was 1.6 million students attended the school with a guidance counselor, with a cop and no guidance counselor. We know that many, and probably all of that 1.6 million are Black and brown students. And what we began to learn from responding from the assault acts was that policing was way more pervasive than what we understood. And that in many cases, like Chicago, they didn't even know how many police officers that they had in their school district until the Black Organizing Project won the nation's first ever complaint system around SROs. They're completely non-existent. Philadelphia is the second city to win it. And so Parkland for us was what we began to term as an educopolis, like just a combination of kind of education, justice, cops, and just a complete disaster, and breaking down of the federal guidelines, or at least the work that was leading up to the federal guidelines. And I think what's really important is to understand that those guidelines were often a reflection of 20 years of organizing led by communities of color, by young people. And so while we wanted legislation, the federal guidelines did create a space for groups to organize and push back against racist school discipline policies. And so for many of us, what we experienced is that kind of a year later, what we can look back and say about this educopolis is that Parkland was to those who want to make our schools into prison what Katrina was to privatizers. And we also have to be clear that they are one and the same. One of the things that we can look at is, according to the National Conference on State Legislators, there have been over 250 bills that have been introduced post-Parkland, mostly focusing on law enforcement, funding, arming teachers, and SRO training. So for us, we say the fight moving forward is one around how do we deprioritize police as an instrument of last resort? How do we dismantle, disinvest from policing? How do we disarm teachers and also police departments that are still receiving arms from the federal 1033 program? And lastly, continuing to always demand the dismantling and breaking up the relationship between schools and police departments. I think the other note we want to raise up is that post-Parkland, there have been 18 assaults in a year. This is the highest year we've seen since 2016 when we first started monitoring. And the week leading up to this webinar, There were 3 assaults. One, the assault at Higgins in Jefferson Parish, as well as in Chicago, the assault at Marshall, where a young Black girl was tased. And then most recently was the assault at Hazleton, where a Black girl was seen being body slammed by a school resource officer. And so for us, part of the demand around emotional supports is that police don't represent safety to Black and brown students. You cannot have to be healthy in an environment that sees you as a threat when those there who are there to protect you don't see you being worth protecting. And so for us in the campaign, and this is us at the National Day of Action, where young people from all over the country gathered to register their dissent and call on Congress to fight back against against the rescission of the federal guidelines. And so what we believe the fight forward is one, we need to defeat the remaining local and state bills that continue to try to challenge or to put more policing in schools. We have to begin to look at and begin to mitigate the harm done by the federal STOP Act. We begin to hear reports that is being used as a justification for policing in school and bad MOUs. We continue to advance the campaigns for police-free schools. When we started this work, we were at 12 campaigns. We've seen 19 campaigns emerge. Some we haven't even had a hand in, like Portland. And then we must continue to teach and practice youth sanctuary strategies, that young people have a right to defend themselves against all forms of violence. That includes cop watch and politicizing restorative justice. Because again, what we've seen from the assaults is that all of them could have been mitigated if the school had a restorative justice culture, had restorative justice in their schools, was practicing a culture of connectedness. And so we must do the hardest work, which is to organize, organize, organize. So that's it for me. Thank y'all, and love and resistance.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now we're going to turn to Tyler Wittenberg with Advancement Project to talk about the We Came to Learn report and action kit, and some of the incredible work that Advancement Project has done around police-free schools.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Wittenberg. As Stina said, Deputy Director of Advancement Project and in the Schoolhouse to Jailhouse Track Project. For those who don't know, Advancement Project is an organization, primarily a legal organization that works with grassroots organizations that are often youth-led through providing legal support, policy analysis, strategic communications, and also campaign development. So yeah, after a lot of the work that Jonathan and other folks have done, as well as AP, we decided to partner with, we all came together and partnered with each other around getting this report out, and the whole idea being, let's actually change the narrative around school policing. We see these things like Parkland happening in other places where they're just throwing millions and millions of dollars into hardening schools, into making schools resemble prisons as opposed to actually nurturing and healthy learning environments. So we wanted to dispel that notion, and what better way than to actually use youth voice and actually case studies from advocates who have been on the ground doing and fighting, as Jonathan's been walking through. So really the main thing was to change the narrative and let folks know police in schools do not make them safer, especially for students of color. They actually they put students of color at risk of physical and mental harm and place their communities in a position where they're confronted with mass incarceration, both within the classroom, but then also in the streets when they're over-policed. And we also wanted to really tie the connection that the same call for policing reform we see in the street and the same shooting of unarmed Black men are tied to the over-policing of students in schools. And so how do we do that? First, if you go to the next slide, we looked at the history of school policing. We've done some really good work. Shout out to Maria Fernandez and some others for putting together this history piece. We wanted to really let people know that school policing didn't start with Columbine. School policing started with the suppression of Black voices during the Civil Rights Movement, and has continuously been tied to the suppression of youth voice and the suppression of any sense of Black self-determination within the educational space. And so when you look at the protests that happened, student protests that happened during the Civil Rights Movement in the cities like Philadelphia and Los Angeles, look at those cities today and they actually have their own school police departments, right? So these things are not disconnected. We also want to let folks know that it is a part of the entire mass incarceration push that is in itself an attempt to disenfranchise Black communities. And really just walk us up to today where we have major investments in policing when we don't have investments in the classroom and the supports that students need. And we use several case studies to also chronicle a lot of the work that Jonathan mentioned, the assault at Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia, where a student simply needed to use the restroom. And when he had to go to a police officer in order to use the restroom. And when he wasn't allowed to use the restroom, simply threw an orange. And what that led to was really a severe beating by the officer on a young Black child. And other case studies, a case study out of Oakland, as well as a case study out of Spring Valley, where Jonathan and others went down there and provided some rapid response support, and even turned youth into advocates, as you were able to see with the love letters on stage. And we can go to the next slide. Another thing the report did was just provide folks with tools that they could use to argue against school policing in their areas. And one of the major tools are the actual analysis of what is the context of school policing, what is the current state of school policing. You have a web of laws and policies that really don't make sense with one another. Law enforcement not being held accountable to the school district. The school district really trying to, often when the school district do try to exert some authority over law enforcement, they're met with a deaf ear. But then you do also have these horrible MOUs, memorandums of understanding, that allow for officers to come in and use their discretion on whether or not an action should be handled as a discipline matter or as a legal matter, which completely throws off the whole push we've had so far around alternatives to exclusionary discipline. And then the funding, who's paying for what? It's very, very hard to trace. Often will be just labeled as student supports or other things of that nature, where you're actually paying for officers' salaries, paying for metal detectors, paying for surveillance, going up into the millions of dollars. When you look at how much is paid for social workers, for things like the after-school programs that were mentioned in the video, you'll find that there's a clear priority to criminalize over support students. And the budgets are very hard to attain, and that's on purpose. And the data as well, Jonathan mentioned some of the statistics, 1.6 million students attending schools with a school police officer and no cop. You had individual die in Philadelphia because there was no nurse there, simply from an asthma attack, when they have police in at that time, they had their own school police department, but they had to have a roaming nurse from school to school. So where are the priorities? Also, looking at, and I definitely want to stress this point, that for Black girls, it may be the most perilous in schools with regards to police officers. Also looking at instances of sexual assault, sexual abuse, and the list goes on and on with regards to the harms that students are exposed through with regards to school policing. And we want to lift that up with the report. And the same lack of accountability that communities of colors find when individuals are killed by police or harassed by police in the streets, that same lack of accountability is mirrored within schools, where parents don't know whether or not there is a complaint system. And then if there is one, it tends to be very, very veiled and hidden from folks after they file a complaint. There's also worries about retaliation. Do you file a complaint with the principal, with the superintendent, with the chief of police? Who do you file a complaint with, and then how do you follow that up? So out of that, also we decided to not just provide the analysis, we wanted to provide the actual tools that folks could take on the ground to answer a lot of these questions, understand what the context of school policing is in their jurisdiction and the school district, and then work to get police out of schools. And so we created an action kit. We can go to the next slide. Here we go. All right, so we decided to create an action kit, and what this does is it creates tools around data. What data should you look for? Where can you go to get the data? We even provide a sample records request so that you can submit. You don't have to be a lawyer to submit a records request. Give you the sample language so you can submit that. gain the information you need to then wage your own struggle against school policing. What does a proper complaint process look like, and how do we make it so that students are safe after filing complaints and that officers are held accountable and that there is transparency in the process? All that is outlined. We provide you with model MOU language. And I want to say also, I can't stress enough that it's not like when we were writing the report that we just decided to come up with all these tools at once. These tools are plucked from the work that was on the ground, from the organizations that, the grassroots organizations like the Padres, like you'll hear about soon, from those in the AEJ network. And so instead of simply having a tool here that was used in Oakland, like the complaint process, and a FOIA that was used in Philly to get some information there, we decided to bring all these tools together and to really learn lessons from the work as we moved along. So hopefully you all will find that helpful. And did I miss anything on that? I think, oh, there's also a sample intake form so that you can, as assaults happen and there's this, you want to join the Assault Act movement, you can also understand how to collect information from each one of these incidents so that you can better hold the school accountable and start to collect data on the number of incidents within your school district. And with that, we can go to the 6Ds. And I think Jonathan went over them pretty well. Yeah, I don't think we need to rehash them out. We all understand that the students are criminalized for age-appropriate behavior. So the push there is to prevent that, to eliminate criminalization for age-appropriate behavior, to make school police a measure of last resort is to deprioritize. We talked about divest, invest, and the real need to build up the supports for students to make their learning environment to make it actually safe for them, not safe from them, as it seems when police are really forced upon Black and brown communities. To disarm, we're talking tasers, we're talking batons, we're talking pepper spray, all the things that have been used to really hold down Black and brown communities throughout history are now in the schools so that people are seeing it. You know, when they're just trying to go to class, and to delegitimize, make sure that that people understand it does not make people safer. And I don't want to take any more of Monica Acosta's time.
Thank you, Tyler. You know, just lifting up something that you said, which is, you know, these recommendations, all of these various solutions sort of outlined in this come from the genius of
Right.
young people and communities and people who are directly impacted by these issues. And, you know, it underscores why we say, and we'll get to this in our next section, of why we have to genuinely engage youth and communities and educators and people most close to the problem. So thank you so much for that. I'm really excited to turn it over to Monica Acosta with Padres Jehovah's Unidos in Denver. And just lifting up that Denver, Colorado is about a half an hour from Littleton, Colorado. And that was the site of Columbine 20 years ago. And so being able to hear from the work that Padres has done around school policing, I think is very significant, given that tragedy 20 years ago. The playbook is very similar when it comes to these tragic school shootings. And so it's important to lift that up and why we are calling for these demands. So Monica, happy to turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you, Tina. Hi, everyone. For those of you that don't know Padres and Jóvenes Unidos, we are a racial justice grassroots membership organization. We are, as Tina said, located in Denver, Colorado. For nearly 28 years now, our flagship campaign has been dismantling the school to prison pipeline. And we actually began organizing to end the criminalization of youth of color back in the early 1990s. The way that our organization was founded was out of a local parent-led campaign that challenged really racist practices in schools and called for the removal of an elementary school principal who was degrading and punishing Spanish-speaking students by forcing them to eat on the cafeteria floor. So the way that our organization was founded was all around discipline, even before we knew that discipline was the issue that we were taking on. Fast forward a couple of years, our members then took on a case as a rapid response case in which a Latino student was arrested at his high school in Denver and then was immediately turned over to ICE. The student was actually deported out of that incident. And so a whole campaign was launched to bring back the student and to began addressing the very troubling links between schools, police, and ICE. And then fast forward again to the early 2000s is when we more intentionally started organizing around the school to prison pipeline. That is when I first joined the organization as a leader and a high school student. At the time, it was the lowest performing high school in the state of Colorado. And it was a type of high school that it was a type of school where a lot of youth went missing. So for example, my class was 700 students and 4 years later, only 200 graduated. It was very normal for us to see police and squad cars inside and outside school. And so the organization began to take a look and began asking questions about what was going on with this push out, with all this police presence. And so we began doing some surveys and other participatory research at the school, at the youth court downtown, and we started collecting and asking for numbers and data. So then is when we began our now very long-lasting partnership with the Advancement Project. And together we dived really deep into the discipline issues. And so it became an organizing campaign for us at the time, even before we knew that this was now called School to Prison Pipeline and School to Deportation Pipeline. And so as our campaign deepened and we really began to doing this work more intentionally, our first strategy was to decriminalize student behavior. It took us many years to be able to win a district-wide policy that was finally approved in 2008, and that included what we called a discipline ladder, which is what guided and in some cases forced or dictated school principals and leaders what types of incidents warranted what types of consequences or interventions. And so this was huge because prior to this time, you know, Black and brown youth were the ones getting suspended, expelled, all of those things. And this is how we first were able to call out these racial disparities. However, that wasn't enough. So we still saw very problematic contact with the police or the SROs in our schools who were just kind of running around very unaccountable. And we were seeing really troubling numbers around referrals to law enforcement amongst Black and brown youth. And so then we shifted our strategy and began working to establish an IGA or an intergovernmental agreement between our school district and our police department. And so we trained youth and parent leaders who sat across the table from our superintendent, our school board members, and our police chief to negotiate this IGA. And the goal of this IGA was to really limit the role of police and really limit all of the many ways and times that schools were calling police to come and intervene. That was in 2013, and at the time, you know, it was one of the first IGAs in the country. But despite the progress and despite these very concrete wins we've had, racial disparities still remain. And today, over the last few years, we have seen how our school district has taken many steps back. So for example, our district safety and security department has now become a much larger player in the intentional criminalization of youth. They are responding to school calls, they're showing up to intervene during incidents, and labeling students as out of control students. Like, out of control students is a real designation that exists in our district. And so that completely, by doing so, they are completely ignoring the discipline policy that we organized for many years to even win. Our safety department is working hand in hand with our city's police department. We have seen in the last year a very dramatic increase in their department budget, in the development of brand new positions that did not exist there before, and so they're working to strengthen their infrastructure. And so all in all, millions and millions of dollars are spent every year in our school district here in Denver to sustain all of the different ways that our district is policing our youth, and especially policing Black and brown youth. Last year, behind closed doors and with no community or student input whatsoever, our Department of Safety, our district's Department of Safety, and with the support of our superintendent, began making moves to establish its own internal police unit. And so because these are all the new ways that we are seeing that the system is shifting, we too have responded, and we too are shifting our own strategies and the way that we're approaching this work. And so currently our strategies are to delegitimize, to disarm, and ultimately to dismantle. Our current campaign is called Counselors Not Cops, and the goal is to win police-free schools by 2020. We are organizing to push our school district basically to divest from school policing and invest in culturally relevant mental health supports, counselors, academic counselors, and restorative justice. Ultimately, our vision for schools are that where schools are truly a safe place for all students, not just some students, where all students feel valued, uplifted, respected. Most importantly, I very often ask students or youth whether they feel like their school whether they feel like they belong in their school, and the majority of the time the answer to that question is no. So we need to transform our schools in order for our youth to feel like they belong there, to feel like they are connected to other students and the adults in that building. To thrive, youth need trusting adults and professionals in their schools. So great teachers who believe in them, great counselors, psychologists, social workers who provide really critical supports, especially in this moment in history. And so that's what our youth are calling for and our parents are supporting. And so to those who say that SROs, school resource officers, can do all of those things, be mentors and coaches and teachers, my answer is absolutely not. No. The primary job and responsibility of an SRO is and will always be to enforce the law first and foremost, above all. Our 25 plus years of doing this work, all the data, all the research, everything points to the realization that I want to leave everyone with, and that is that we cannot and will never achieve this vision of what schools should be like while there is police inside of them. No matter how many discipline policies we pass, no matter how many IGAs we work on, no matter how many trainings we send SROs to, our Black and brown youth will still come out losing. And we cannot allow the hardening of schools to happen on the back of and on the expense of Black and brown youth. Simply said, while some may feel safe, our youth feel threatened. And you heard that before too. Our youth feel threatened, not protected. Their health, their well-being, their success, even their lives are at risk, at stake every single day. And this is not okay, and we won't allow this. And so all of our work and all of our campaign, as an organization and as part of a larger movement that we are all a part of, that is what we're working towards. So thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you to all three of you, Jonathan, Tyler, Monica, just for sharing in this section. And we're gonna roll right into the second part of this, where we lift up the demand to genuinely engage youth educators and communities. And we lift up this demand in part because we know that when the Federal Commission on School Safety did its work last year, this is something they did not do. They did not genuinely engage the community when they made their safety, so-called safety recommendations. So this is an important ask that we have. I'm really excited to introduce Audra Cologne of Rockaway Youth Task Force, which is part of the Urban Youth Collaborative in New York City. She's going to talk about the organizing efforts in New York, long-standing, incredible work coming out of New York City. And also Kate Terenzi of Center for Popular Democracy will talk about the National Youth Demand campaigns. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
Thank you, Thina. I'm going to share my screen really quick for a presentation, like the slides. Okay. Okay. So hi, my name is Audra Cologne, and I'm the community engagement organizer with the Rockaway Youth Task Force, which is a member organization of Urban Youth Collaborative. And our work, just some background, is really to uplift the voices of Black and Brown youth here in New York City around the different issues we face in our schools. And so I really just want to start off with that context of how we engage students, educators, and communities. And I think one of the biggest things for us when having these conversations with our young people is tying the presence and the over-policing in our schools to the policing in communities of color, and really looking at it as an extension and really examining and having conversations around setting a precedent. So when we do we don't have a date yet, but when we do get cops out of schools, setting that precedent that police do not equal safety for communities of color, and really looking to get buy-in from schools, principals, teachers into things like restorative justice and investment of guidance counselors and social workers. And similar to what Monica was saying was a part of our work. So let me go to my next slide. We recognize that as no matter how hard we fight for those things, as long as those tools to, arrest or give a summons to a student or to suspend a student for 180 days, as long as those tools exist, they're going to continue to be used. So as much buy-in as we have, as much as we try and shift the culture, we really have to start with getting rid of those harmful tools that disproportionately impact students of color. So here in New York City, we're fighting for the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, along with other organizations. So essentially what that is a piece of legislation that would eliminate suspension for K-3 students, because currently a kindergartner can be suspended in New York, and that is very baffling and wrong on so many levels. So that's a start to eliminate suspensions for kindergartners to third graders, reduce the maximum amount of days that a student can be suspended from 180 to 20 days. And so 180 days is essentially an entire school year. And so here in New York, if it happens in the middle of the school year, it carries on to the next year. If it happens on the last day of school, it carries on to the very next year. And when we look at the statistics and do research, we see that these types of suspensions disproportionately impact Black and Brown youth. And so again, with that lens of really taking away the tools that educators have to criminalize Black and Brown students is the first step. And it would also eliminate suspensions for minor infractions. So for example, I've seen before in school where you refuse to take your hat off, or you try and throw something in the trash and it doesn't land inside and they say you're littering, just for very minor things, you're suspended. And a lot of people view the school to prison pipeline as something indirect, as you get suspended and then your likelihood of getting arrested in the future increases. But for us, it's actually very direct. So that ties into how here in New York City, you can be arrested inside of schools, you can be given a summons. And so a part of the Safe and Supportive Schools Act is also to really limit the level of interactions that school safety agents can have with students. And so that's, again, one of the first steps. And ending arrest and summons. So here in New York City, Black and Latinx students make up 63% of the school population, yet account for 92% of arrests and 89% of summons. And so that data is very clear to us that our educational system is very rooted in systemic racism. And so our struggle with that is the fact that we don't have local school boards or some sort of city council power. After Mayor Bloomberg, during his term, he declared mayoral control of the Department of Education. So currently, we're really advocating for the mayor to use his mayoral control of the education system to issue an operations order, which is essentially like an executive order, which would order the police commissioner to stop arresting and giving summons in schools. And we just don't have that support. And so we're currently looking at different ways to address that. And really, so the biggest thing with this is how harmful it is. So for example, when I was in school, there would be scuffles or fights, and then you see like seconds later, police storming down the halls, like holding their cuffs in their hands, like holding onto their guns, like just on their waist, and looking at how traumatizing this is for students. And so again, back to like Monica's point of, even if we did have, you know, all the resources we're fighting for, like restorative justice, guidance counselors, and social workers, and police at the same time, at least like students would have, you know, like somewhere to go. But the point is, we don't want those like traumatizing interactions at all. And so that's those are the two of our biggest fights right now, to end arrest and summons and to pass the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, because New York City is deemed as this super diverse and progressive city, but we actually have the most segregated public school system in the country. And I guess I should have given this before, but some background. So the DOE and the NYPD have a contract with each other. So the DOE it's about $300 million every single year to the NYPD to have that like separate, to have that extension of the NYPD. And so our school safety officers are directly NYPD. And so all that money, that's being funneled through, yet when we ask for $2 million in restorative justice, it's just like an automatic no. So it really comes to show the priorities of the city. And so especially after Parkland, when the mayor held a town hall to hear the concerns of students in the city, I think he was really expecting something very cliche, like, oh, we need more metal detectors, we need more police officers. And us as UIC really came in and changed that narrative of, no, we actually need more guidance counselors and restorative justice, because New York City and Florida are like two very different landscapes. And so our demands are going to be different than the demands of students of Parkland. And so we really shifted that narrative during the town hall, and he still is not really on our side, but I think we've been applying a lot more pressure, and so our voices are definitely being heard and uplifted, and it's really time for change here in New York City. And I had another one, and so just like really quick, what's really missing, and I sort of already touched on this. I think after the tragedy in Parkland, the demands and the voices of Black and Brown youth were really lacking. And us as UIC definitely support and stand in solidarity with the students of Parkland and in Florida, but definitely recognizing how those who were affected by the tragedy would not want the catalyst effect of what's currently what happened after Parkland, which was here in New York City, we had pop-up metal detectors in every single school. So the school I attended had full-time metal detectors, so it didn't change anything for us. But schools that didn't have them had between March and June, they had like pop-up metal detectors. And so again, that goes back to funding, like you can find the funding for that, but you can't find it for things like literally we actually like $2 million for New York City's budget is like pennies. And so applying pressure around that, and then again just lifting up the different landscapes and how it shouldn't be like a us against them. It's really just young people coming together and fighting for their vision of what safe schools look like, and trusting us in our experiences and our trauma really with what's happened within the past few decades. And so yeah, and just like looking at alternatives and really looking at them as viable, which is the biggest thing. And that's really not going to happen until we get police out of schools. I just see a question. I don't know if I could like try and answer it now.
We can actually, Andrea, save some questions for the end.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and just a quick note to all of our wonderful viewers, please continue to put your questions in the chat box and Q&A, and we'll make sure to get to your questions at the end.
Yeah, so that I just really want to end off with the fact that how important it is to uplift the voices of Black and Brown youth, because we are the ones who are most affected by the policy changes and by this rhetoric of what safe schools look like. And the more our voices are not heard and uplifted and just not really given a platform, the more harm that's going to be caused.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to turn it over now to Kate Terenzi from Center for Popular Democracy.
Hi, everyone. I am Kate Terenzi, as Dina mentioned, staff attorney with the Education Justice Campaigns team, and really happy to be on this call with all of you. So for the folks that I haven't met yet, the Center for Popular Democracy is a network of 50 community-based organizations in areas all across the communities all across the country who are doing community organizing to build power and really take on the fights for the issues that matter most to their communities. And many of these organizations are building power with young people to end the school to prison and deportation pipelines. And these youth groups have come together to learn from each other and work together through a collective called the Youth Everywhere Rising and Resisting. And to the question of why it's so important for young people to lead the way, as you've heard, young people of color all across the country have been fighting for decades to create safe, supportive, and inclusive schools, and their solutions really work. And to share some examples of what doesn't work, right? Like what happens when we fail to listen to young people of color. We see that in the sort of backlash to the Parkland tragedy that was exploited for racist purposes to further criminalizing young people. And that's happened in our nation generally and in communities that young people are in. So as just a few examples, in Milwaukee, a district that notoriously is underfunded for their education, they've poured millions of dollars into increasing their zero intolerance policies, adding criminalizing security infrastructure, and have applied for grants that will continue to build their school to prison pipeline. And that's a community where the federal government, before our current administration, found that there was rampant discrimination happening in their school district. As Andrea was mentioning, in New York City, they're building this criminalizing infrastructure. Just in the last year, they've added, we just found out that they've added $100 million to their surveillance technology and metal detectors in the backlash from the Parkland tragedy. Added policies like these roving metal detectors that Andrea mentioned, and they've already, the school to prison pipeline in New York City already costs $746 million per year. And I was just seeing this morning that in addition to all of the federal funding that's coming out, just local and state districts have added an additional $1 billion to this school to prison pipeline security, quote unquote, security infrastructure and criminalizing infrastructure in the last year. And that's only from 26 different states. So if you imagine if you pooled all of the cities, counties, states, and then the federal government together, what is being caused and the harm that's being caused by not listening to young people is devastating. And can you imagine instead a place where we actually moved this money into the vision of young people? We actually listened to what they know will work, what and has been proven to work over and over again in research, that really supporting young people, giving them opportunities to learn, to be free, to be creative. Those are the communities, those are the schools in which young people are actually thriving, and are safer, better outcomes on all levels when we listen to their vision. And they know, well, we've seen, as we've all talked about the presentations, these demands are really similar because young people know what works, right? Like they know exactly what they want. They know exactly what the classrooms that feel right, the classrooms that feel oppressive, the structures that harm them, all of those have come together in the demands that have been built through a long history of communities of color, youth of color, and their demands in communities like New York City, organizations like Padres y Jóvenes, and all of the organizations that are on this call, to really lift up what that vision looks like. And so I'm just going to share a quick video that compiles some of these demands and then talk a little bit about what it looked like over the last bit of time for local communities and nationally to be fighting for these. One second while I just share this video with the collective demands.
We are Black and brown youth from across the United States of America. School safety is about our lives, about our daily experiences.
We have a vision for how we want our schools to look, and we demand that our voices need to be heard.
After the tragic Parkland school shooting, Donald Trump established a federal commission to study school safety and make policy recommendations on how to prevent violence in schools.
Trump appointed Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Over the past several months, the commission largely left students out of the conversation.
Donald Trump indicated that they supported hardening schools with more metal detectors, arming teachers with guns, putting more cops, and we know that these policies will make our students feel more like prisoners.
Black students are more likely to go to school with a cop than a counselor.
Black boys are 3 times more likely to be arrested in school.
The federal government brought deportation cases against nearly 250,000 young people in 2018 alone.
That's why we're saying enough.
Youth demand divestment from school policing, comprehensive mental and emotional health services, more guidance counselors and social workers, expansion of restorative justice education programs, culturally responsive education programs, investment in schools and teachers, protection for students and families against ICE arrests, a concrete plan to end gun and state violence.
And we need you to join us now.
Black and brown youth from across the country have made our demands clear.
So as you can see, those demands are really powerful, and they've been the demands all of the organizations in on this call came together, pulling the work that has happened in communities everywhere to really lift those up as the federal quote-unquote school safety commission was coming together to share what would make young people safe in school. The national, when we lifted these up, they went to directly to the School Safety Commission. Over 5,000 people sent emails to the commission sharing these demands. when the commission failed young people and instead enacted policy recommendations that were going to put people in harm's way by adding more cops. They even had a troops to teachers program in the commission report that would bring military personnel directly into schools and did other incredibly harmful things. Young people again banded together and over 3,000 people sent emails to their congressional representatives condoning these recommendations, or condemning, excuse me, these recommendations. And there are campaigns ongoing in local districts everywhere to really move forward. There's a new urgency, a renewed urgency around ensuring that local and state lawmakers really take this moment to protect young people of color, to ensure that their vision is the vision that is driving their school districts. And so in communities everywhere, we're seeing these fights continue. And we know that if we enact that vision, that it will work, that it will center young people and what they need in schools. And so I hope we can all be guided by that and continue in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. In this final section, we're going to talk about the demand to keep and elevate the federal discipline guidance. And maybe I should reframe that to say restore the discipline guidance. As many of you know, the federal discipline guidance was rescinded as it was a recommendation that was made from the Federal Commission on School Safety, and it was rescinded about a week or so later. And what's interesting about that is the law can't be rescinded, right? The law is the law is the law. The federal discipline guidance, as Marlon Tillman will share with us, outlines civil rights obligations for school districts to ensure that discipline was not administered in a discriminatory manner. And what's interesting is that this 2014 guidance made a very clear connection between positive and supportive school climates and safety. One of the quotes from that guidance said that fair and equitable discipline policies are an important component of creating an environment where all students feel safe and welcome. So this connection between equity and safety is key, and yet this commission chose to rescind that guidance. So I'm really honored to introduce Marlon Tillman of Gwinnett Stop and the Dignity in Schools campaign, and she'll discuss the evolution and the significance of this guidance and why it matters to this school safety conversation.
Thank you, Zena. I appreciate the intro and the welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Marlon Tillman. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Gwinnett Parent Coalition to Dismantle the School to Prison Pipeline, or Gwinnett Stop for short. And we organize parents, youth, community to do just what it says. Give me just a sec to get my slides up. Thought I had it set, but you know, what you get from technology. Okay, so 5 years ago, the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights and the Justice Department Civil Rights Division jointly issued these guidance documents, reminding school districts of the law, giving them a roadmap to identify and avoid and remedy discriminatory disciplinary policies. That didn't happen without an impetus. So the landscape in Gwinnett and Georgia is pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Doesn't matter if you have straps, doesn't matter if you have boots. That is the mentality here. Lock them up, you know, over criminalization at every turn. So we started organizing parents, youth, community members, teachers, school social workers around this issue of school to prison pipeline. And we've had some wins along the way. We were successful in getting our disciplinary code leveled before anything could get you off to a tribunal, and so we got it leveled. We were also responsible for getting school discipline in our school climate indicator on our state's report card. Not the way we thought it was going to be implemented, but the devil's always in the details, right? And then eliminating the contact quota for school police in Gwinnett County schools. They actually had a contact quota for their officers. The district called it a poorly worded policy. Yeah, okay, but when you pull up data, you can see it wasn't just a poorly worded policy, it was also a practice. And so that's the landscape here. And so we are a member of the Dignity in Schools campaign, and I myself serve as the federal liaison for their federal work. And Dignity in Schools members worked in conjunction with several coalitions, many of which are part of this webinar, AJ Advancement Project, national advocacy groups, NAACP LDF, who provides direct federal advocacy support to DFE. We worked with researchers to push the the U.S. Department of Education to get serious about what's going on in our communities, the disparate impact and treatment of school discipline in our communities. Our kids were being pushed out without an appropriate education to carry them through life. And where do they come back to? Home, with the parents. And so we need our kids to be successful. We need them not in our homes. We need them out in the community having successful, happy lives, going on, just living their best life. So how did we start? And I forgot I'm doing my own slides here. And so how did all of this work start? So we organized. We organized, and organized. We wanted laws, regulations, and supports to address the overcriminalization of our children. We made multiple trips to Washington, D.C. to advocate and educate our legislators about the issue. We held rallies on the Hill. We had listening sessions. We had hearings to draw attention to the disparate treatment of Black and brown children at school. While shootings at school happen at majority white schools and primarily committed by white students, students with large Black and brown populations get the uptick in school police and buildings that resemble and function like prisons. There is no evidence that police make schools safer. And we've heard that over and over again from all of the speakers today. As you go into our communities, you'll hear the same thing. We've met with departments of education and justice officials as well as legislators and their staff to educate them about the issues that we see in our communities. We wrote letters, whether they had a federal notice of proposed rulemaking or not. We wrote them. And then we did it all over again, organize. And along the way, we were successful in requiring school systems to utilize evidence-based strategies when they're applying for federal education grants from the Office of Safe and Healthy Students, as well as other federal grants to schools. Legislators also started introducing bills and resolutions that were focused on creating a positive school climate, particularly for those most vulnerable students. After years of work and pushing to put something in place, the guidance was issued. And we saw that as a great start. And so the guidance provided a roadmap for schools so that they meet their legal obligations under federal civil rights law when they're administering student discipline, so that they can avoid discriminating against students on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, identification, or education program, i.e. students with disabilities. The guidance didn't create any new laws, but it did give more clarity and provided tons of resources for schools and districts and families. The principles were simple. They grounded us in a positive vision for public education. The guidance provided that roadmap on how do you get to that positive vision and it included a compilation of school discipline laws so states could pull from the good and avoid the bad, helped parents gain the language needed to be better advocates for their children, a real-life analysis of school discipline situations, how the department would look at those and treat them, because they were real stories from the real experiences on the ground that parents and students provided to the department. And so now it also goes into, there are other districts around the country who started to embrace the guidance and started to look within and see how they can avoid discriminating against students, Rochester, Denver, California, Broward. And as they saw success, then other systems came on board and intentionally sought help from the U.S. Department of Ed and other systems that were seeing this success in creating a more positive school climate.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Is your slide able to advance?
It didn't advance for you, it advanced for me.
Okay.
So is it at the law is still the law? No?
It's actually, I believe, still on the first one, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow. They're advancing. I have my presentation that they can put up?
No problem. We can also share after.
Okay, so I'll keep going. I'm sorry about that. But it is showing us a slide. I'll just keep going. And for some reason, the current administration saw creating a positive school climate where students with disabilities and Black and brown students are emotionally safe to learn while at school as something evil. And so they rescinded it. And while the rescission of the guidance isn't something we wanted to happen, but expected, because the current administration has also rescinded other guidance documents that help parents and school systems navigate the rights of children, including guidance, supporting students with disabilities, our most vulnerable communities. And so it would appear, given the actions that have been going on over and it's not even just this administration, I think they've just heightened it, but it just appears over the years that Black and brown students, students with disabilities, are wearing a target on their back. And the administration may have seen fit to take away schools, tools from schools so children won't be successful. But we at DSC and Gwinnett Stott will ensure that children, teachers, parents, and communities will have the resources they need to be successful and accountable. The law is still the law. It's a campaign and a take action toolkit for folks to use to remind systems what their obligations are and encourage the reaffirmation of their duties. And so it includes a sample letter and a resolution to target decision makers to reaffirm their commitment. It provides a list of states, counties, and districts that have made similar pledges. It has statements from DSC and their allies on the rescission of the guidance and how to move forward, and resources for creating your own response to that. And so much more. Please take a look. I'm happy that they're going to share the slides, and I do apologize that they're not advancing. And to switch computers at the last minute again and wire. And so another campaign that DSC is running, Dignity in Schools is running, is Counselors Not Cops. And our Counselors Not Cops campaign is designed to assist communities in removing police from schools. Police should be called in an emergency and not posted up in the building profiling students. So it includes policy recommendations, a resource guide, and data on the issue. One of the first policy recommendation documents that DSC created was our DSC Model Code on Education and Dignity, which is a set of model policies that can be used for codes of conduct, or it could be used for introducing legislation. The model code is grounded in the human rights principles and framework. We recently updated it and have other revisions in the works. It is now included in our Counselors Not Cops campaign materials. I encourage you to check it out. It was the thing that we used to help reduce the number of infractions that could get a student interaction with the school police by 33%. We just sat down with that and had them agree to those principles and assembled them. And the great thing that I like about it is that you can just pull sections that you need, shift them around, make them your own, and walk into a meeting and bam, go. It doesn't require a whole lot of prep. And so it also, and this is very, very important that we have these tools. It would be nice if we had the guidance as well so that schools could have the other set of tools, but there are links there in our Counselors Not Cops campaign that you can go through and pull up those documents that I spoke of earlier. But we have to use a holistic, proactive approach to real school safety. According to the Civil Rights Data Collection and that they distribute, and the GAO, the General Accounting Office, who analyze the EDS data, students with disabilities and Black and brown students are disproportionately impacted by overly punitive discipline, right? But we know this, right? So why can't we fix it? And right now, students with disabilities and Black and brown students are not emotionally safe to learn at school. And we know long ago, school police moved from protecting the children to policing the children. Police can be called for emergencies, as I said before, not patrolling the halls. Policing has been shown to disproportionately criminalize our kids. School-based arrests and referrals increase when you have a policeman present in the school building. They're doing in the schools what they do in our communities. Why does anybody think that would be different? We need to create a climate of care and nurturing, a place where students are not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. We have to invest in these evidence-based violence reduction strategies that engage all community stakeholders, and they are proven effective, unlike police in schools. We can use peacekeepers instead of that. We can have restorative practices or transformative justice, which allows for building a relationship that didn't exist before. We have to provide resources like counselors, improve school facilities, accessible after-school programs that help better connect students to school. When students are connected, their parents connect. And when we're providing these services, we have to be careful that we're not pathologizing our children. That's also something that seems to happen in Black and brown communities with students with disabilities. And I think we know the answers. We have to do the harder work. It is not going to be an instantaneous fix, but you put time and you fund your values. I hope that we make this a value. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon. And again, we'll be sure to share slides from this presentation. We have a couple of questions that came through during the webinar. One of them, and in some ways it kind of speaks to what you were just talking about, Marlon, around restorative practices. And the question was, how do we get buy-in for restorative practices? I've had multiple administrators and staff tell me that restorative practices don't work here. And I'm sure many of you do this work, have heard this before. Would anyone like to respond to that question with some experiences about that?
So we are still pushing for restorative practices in our schools as well. And I've heard the very same thing. I think Jonathan put a very pointed remark in the chat box in response to that, listing the fact that that's usually rooted in some anti-Black feelings, and that restorative justice is not just a circle. I thought I'd fall out laughing when I saw that. It is not just a circle, people. It is a whole program. It is intentional. It is woven through what you do every day. It is how, I often say that managing student behavior and managing school climate is not telling Johnny to stop or Jamal to stop. It's setting up the whole place in a way that makes them connected, that keeps them engaged, and that if they're off task, then you can tell them to stop, and they're going to do that because they have a relationship with you. And so we are still pushing for those things and trying to get our district to understand it's more than a circle. And even though we are talking to Black people in our district about this, that they have to have some self-love. So I won't say my usual thing. We'll leave it there.
I also think that districts often say that when they haven't done the work to do true investment in the restorative program. So if they aren't ensuring that it's a robust program, if they aren't putting the money towards it, if they're treating it like it's just a circle and it's not a shift in entire culture, then it won't work. And it requires deep investment on the part of the districts, that interrogating why they think that it doesn't work. It might be because they haven't implemented it correctly, or in the vision of young people of what they're actually asking for and what would actually be successful.
Thank you. Another question that came up. What are some effective tools or examples that we can look to for guidance in supporting youth participatory action research concerning the school to prison pipeline? I feel like we've got some great examples from projects, from...
I'll jump in there now, right? So I know Dignity in Schools has a Stop the School to Prison Pipeline campaign, toolkit, and if you check out the website, and once you get the slides, they are hyperlinked, and so you can go to their website and check out the Stop the School to Prison Pipeline toolkit, and it does talk about participatory action, how to do it, and a lot of resources around that.
Thank you, Marlene. And Jonathan, I think you were also about to add on around youth participatory action research.
Yeah, I was being politically sharp. I was going to say like cop watches, participatory action research. Documenting the assaults, learning about police presence is a great model of politicize. So.
Thank you. Other thoughts on that question? All right. Another question that we got in our Q&A here: when addressing school safety and violence, how do we talk about investment in comprehensive mental health supports while also talking about white supremacy and its role in school assaults? Would any of our esteemed panelists like to take that one on? Tyler?
I do think there's a piece there about white male fragility. All the shoot, like, I've spoken to different different groups of people, including law enforcement, including teachers, including people from school districts, and that they start talking about these information sharing systems, these different ways of surveying students so that we can identify the next shooter. And every time I have to stand up and say, we have a profile. These are young white males, most of whom who have some mental health issue and have been exposed to white nationalist radicalization. So I think I know it may not fit every room, but it's undeniable, and to just name it for what it is. They want to talk about radical Islam, Black extremists. The shooters from schools actually tend to be white males who have been radicalized in a different way. So if we can name it and then go ahead and say, all right, well, you all address that problem and allow Black and brown students and parents to have exercise self-determination over what mental health services they need and what they need to be safe, then, like I said, it may not be the most popular opinion, but it's still speaking truth about.
Thank you. There's another question about what organizing efforts are underway to restore the civil rights disparities data collection at the federal level. And a comment that the federal division has been eviscerated. What efforts, what pushes are underway around this? And a point that's also made, wrapped up in this question, that without accurate disparities on data, we become less well-armed to fight. So would anyone like to talk about some of those that discipline data collection piece?
So I'll take I can let Tyler have. Well, in ESSA, there is a requirement to collect data and distribute it. And so states should and distribute it, disaggregate it. And so you should see your state report cards, check out your state education websites to see if they're actually doing it. I know a number of states are actually doing it, and some have put up very complicated dashboards to hide it. And at that point, you say, just open records, request it, and give me what you got in the way that I want to see it. But it is a requirement of ESSA, and as far as I know, states are complying, but would love to hear if they're not.
And I just add to that yes, absolutely they are required to, but there's really no punishment or penalty if they don't. And what we find are that a lot of them actually aren't recording what they should. Good news is, I think this, well, not necessarily good news, but we found that a faster route is often to go through the state, because the state is the one turning in the data to the federal government, not the district, right? The district sends it to the state sends it to the feds. So submitting records requests straight to the state, we often get the data we're looking for faster. Also, we'll request data straight from the police department, not from the school district. And we'll put the address of the school. So who's arrested from this address by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense. And by geography, we mean school. And then you get a long list of data. And then we control for age. So take out everything 18 and above. Because what you'll notice they're also arresting a lot of adults on campus, oddly enough, which is like that threw us off. But yeah, so there's just different ways to try to go around it. And you're right, there's a requirement, but I think we need to get teeth. We need to really get some teeth on that requirement so that everyone's doing it.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And if we were like projecting for, I think that's definitely a continued need and a real fight. I think when we think about the 6 Ds, like I was always battling over the 7th one around being data, right? Because we have no idea kind of the pervasiveness of police presence, how money is being spent, the rules, all that kind of stuff. So it's a real fight that cities need to be in. As well as, but I also want to mitigate it because I also think that the data was also combined with a federal, at the time, a federal administration that was really wedded to at least using the data to question the practice of those states and cities. And we don't see that we don't see that intention. And so data will just be data without some level of kind of conversation or dialogue or power to try to change the numbers.
Absolutely. We also do requests at the juvenile court because that's another way to get it. And it depends on your state, whether they're collecting all the data from this. Well, now with ESSA, all of them have to send all systems have to send it to the state. But the reporting to the feds depends on what the state's policies are. If they're going to report it directly to the feds for the CRDC collection, or if they're all aggregating it at the state and the state has decided to send it. But the state is a good place to get it. The juvenile courts are a great place to get it. to get the police interactions, and by all means, do it from your local police to see what happens at that address. You will find lots of adults are being arrested, and a lot of them are parents.
Thank you. Well, at this time, I know we are a little bit over time, but I want to thank all of our wonderful viewers and listeners for hanging in there with us. I want to thank our panelists for just offering your incredible expertise on this work. What you should be seeing on your screen now is a list of all of the organizations that either partnered with us on this effort or in some way are doing this harder work that we're talking about. We want to invite you to keep this conversation going on Twitter using the hashtags. You can even take a screenshot of this screen if you want to just keep note of all of the different Twitter handles and hashtags, because we know this conversation is going to continue. And everyone on this webinar is doing that harder work. Thank you for your time today. And we will see you on the front lines of education justice. Thank you all.